Tom Savage of Three Red Kings. Tom, the autumn series came to an end over the weekend, and it came to a winning end for Ireland with a convincing win over Scotland. And we've kind of been here before with Scotland kind of coming over, threatening to do X, Y, and Z, and kind of not fulfilling or living up to the promises.
Yeah, pretty much. Eddie O'Sullivan has taken a bit of heat after the game on social media, because he, I think, rightfully described Scotland as being a bit soft. Delusional, perhaps. I mean, Stuart Hogg was talking about maybe Scotland controlling 70 minutes of that game, which I think is generous. It was roughly on half that, I would say. But yeah, it was a good win for Ireland in the end. Scotland looked very good at times in that first half, but I felt Ireland, once they got a little break, I think there was a moment where Hugo Keenan and Jacob Stockdale made a bit of a mess of a backfield defensive set, or a backfield kick management set, left huge space there. Jack van der Waal kicked right back into the Irish 22. Scotland infringed on the Irish 5-metre line with a needless tackle in the air on Bundy Aki, and that gave Ireland the impetus to go up the field. Duncan Taylor got a yellow card a few minutes later after some very good phase play from Ireland. And from there, Ireland just kind of took advantage. They scored a penalty. They went and got a try. They, I'd say, won the game really in that middle third of the game, and just saw it out from there. And, there won't be any cartwheeling in the streets, even as Ireland have been slipping over the course of the last 2 seasons. We've beaten Scotland fairly consistently. By that measure, losing to Scotland would have been a disaster for Andy Farrell, but they've managed to avoid that. So they'll go into the 2021 season knowing that they've got ground to catch up on France and England, but relatively happy with the year overall, I would say.
Tom, I suppose, haven't we always really had ground to catch up on France and England when you think of the resources, the player numbers, all that sort? I mean, any time that we've been competitive or ahead of them, I think you could almost say that we've overachieved in those instances. I mean, the odds are stacked against us numerically. The odds are stacked against us with regards to the playing pool and to what the French and English clubs can draw on. But is it time for maybe Irish rugby fans to have a small dose of realism to say, okay, well, look, I think Sexton made the point that we've won every other match this year bar England and France, and in both instances we were on the road. So, or in all instances, I think in all three we were on the road in those games. And I mean, any team would struggle to go to Twickenham and beat this England side, and currently any team would struggle to go to France and beat this French side. So, where's the balance between where things are going wrong for Ireland and maybe having more realistic expectations from Irish rugby supporters?
Well, I think it all goes back to that night in November 2018 when Ireland beat the All Blacks. I think when Ireland took on the All Blacks in that game in 2018, I know it was 2 seasons ago, and to take on the All Blacks in that game and then beat them with the number one in the world on the line, we'll suppose, for in that moment, not a World Cup, but a big game nonetheless. That, I think, raised expectations of an Irish team who'd won a Grand Slam earlier in the year, who had beaten Australia in a series that year also. That kind of changed expectations. And Ireland have been judged against that year ever since. And it's difficult to live up to that. Like you said there, like France, I think, had been a basket case for much of the 2010s. I'd say from, Ireland started looking to try and beat France home and away relatively regularly for the majority of the 2010s, really.
Yeah, and I think we were relying on them remaining that basket case. And there was always that caveat that if they did get it together, and if they did manage to get structures, and if they did manage to, get a coaching team in there who could instill discipline into these rugby players that they had at their disposal, that we weren't just going to have to be, looking towards beating England every odd year that we had them in Lansdowne Road for a Grand Slam or for a Six Nations Championship. But now with France to deal with as well, we've been our problems have doubled.
Very much so. You look at the early and mid 2000s, the 90s. Ireland coming up against France usually meant a defeat of some kind. Do you remember Croke Park in 2007? Like all the way through the 2000s, France were this huge obstacle for Ireland. And, I think when you look at the money that came into the French game, which was always there anyway, they started to sign a lot of guys. And I think that made it difficult for them to bring through a consistent line of talent. They made a few bad coaching hires that were obviously bad in hindsight. But under Fabien Galtier and Sean Edwards, they seem to have gotten real coherence. Remember, this French side is after bringing in one under 20 world championship, I think 2 under 20 world championships, I think. But a lot of talented players coming through there that they've just put straight into their test side, like Antoine Dupont, young Antamac, a few other of these guys as well, Demba Bamba, and there's other guys as well who we haven't even seen yet, the likes of Jordan Joseph. These guys they've got so much talent, and I think they're second, I suppose a second and third selection, you might say, taking on a full strength England team, pulling them all the way. It's ominous for what Ireland are to expect in the Six Nations going forward. That said, Ireland will have England and France in the Aviva Stadium this coming spring. 2 huge games. Ireland will look to win at least one of those. They'll be looking to win both of them. But, if you come away with 2 losses there, all of a sudden, I don't think people are that happy with the idea of Ireland being back to being number 3 at best in the Six Nations.
Yeah, I think satisfaction for Irish rugby fans really is to win the 3 away games, which again, going to Murrayfield, Cardiff and Rome is no easy task. But to win the 3 away games, and if you can win the first home game to put yourself in with a shout of that championship weekend or championship winning weekend, then I think I'm not saying that this Irish team is on a massively upward curve, but at least we're showing that we're remaining competitive, and I think that's all you can ask for when you go back over the years of the results in the Six Nations for Ireland. And you also have to remember as well that I suppose this has been flagged for a while, and you only have to look to the Champions Cup record of French teams travelling over here in recent years. There was a time when you'd have French teams who, might be disinterested, might not travel, might just throw their hat at a Heineken Cup, Champions Cup weekend when there wasn't a whole lot on the line. But that has changed, and we've seen the likes of Racing come over here and turn Munster over, give us very, very difficult games. And I suppose that kind of mentality now has fed through to the national side in France and has presented itself as a problem in the Six Nations as well as in the Champions Cup.
Yeah, look, it's reminiscent of the early 2000s again, really, isn't it? You look at the way that, like Munster this year have Clermont. That's going to be a very big series of games against a good Clermont side. Munster have faced Racing 92 very regularly over the last few seasons, and landed a few shots here and there, but overall, I think Racing got the better of those duels, I would say. It's very difficult. Irish rugby really does have to pick resources from everywhere, and we're going through a very important contracting cycle right now where I think Ireland might be looking at what France have done and looked at the way they've backed their young guys to come in and play important roles straight away. Like you look at Dupont, Antamac, you look at Jalibert at the weekend as well, another guy who's come in and played a big role. They're looking to duplicate that, I would say, because that Irish under-20 sides of the last couple of years have won Grand Slams. They won one the year before last. They probably were on the way to winning one this year prior to COVID coming in and changing things up. So, I think there's a lot of potential there for Ireland. There's a lot of young players to come through, and there's a lot of guys at the senior level who aren't washed up by any means. But it's a big contracting cycle. That all plays into what we expect from Ireland going forward.
I noticed you say big contracting cycle, and lots of the rumours about whether or not the IRFU are going to have the resources to keep some of these guys at home. It is probably the most important contract window that the IRFU have faced in a long time, and with such uncertainty around the game, you would have to question what is going to happen over the next few months, especially looking forward with the Irish international side. And I mean, look, it probably, with Munster not having as big a representation of internationals in the Irish matchday squads, it's probably a bigger problem for Leinster than it would be for Munster right now. Yeah,
like I think just my own thoughts on it. If it's true that there's going to be a Pro 16 next year, I think all teams are looking to try and reduce this test window. And with that comes an opportunity, I suppose, which will hurt some teams more than others to reduce your squad size. I think the IRFU, all the unions, I think, union-backed teams, even all the teams that are non-union in the Gallagher Premiership, who aren't, union-backed or whatever, will be looking to see if they can reduce their squad size. The Irish sides have had to have large squads in the Pro 14 because the majority of the winning of a Pro 14 is done during test windows. But post-COVID, money is very scarce. If they get an opportunity to see where they can cut costs, relatively speaking, across the board, if it means that, very little test match rugby means you don't have to have as big a squad, there's room to cut maybe 5 or 6 guys. Some teams will find that easier than others. A team like Leinster uses their depth it's probably their biggest strength, I would say, their depth, their ability to wield 1, 2, sometimes even 3 really, really strong sides. But I think the days of Irish provinces and others like wielding, maybe 50-man professional squads during a season, I think that's something that is an easy target to be reduced, to try and reduce costs, because I think the IRFU spent a lot of money this year keeping everything going. They may look to try and go, well, look, we need to start building our cash reserves back up. We need to cut costs. So they may look at, well, maybe we'll try and keep as many of the top guys as we can, invest in the younger guys, and then it's those guys who are kind of in middle of the road depth chart that could be in trouble, that they may look at and going, well, thank you very much for your service. We can't contract everybody we'd like to, and that could be that for some people who are on the bubble of the international side and who might be north of 26, 27, and guys who are middle of the pack in their for Heineken Cup selection, who might not be close to who could be just depth players in a certain position. So I think Munster would be quite well set with regards to investing in clear, obvious talents who are there, who are young, who are emerging this season and showing they can be top players. It would be more difficult elsewhere. Like, Leinster will have, if they had to have a squad reduction, for example, in this hypothetical scenario. I mean, who do you keep? Who do you let go? It's very difficult, and you can see just quite a bit of heat coming on David Nucifora in the press. I've seen a few guys in the Irish Times, Gordon Darcy, a few other fellas have real cuts off David Nucifora as of late. So it just gets the feeling that there is some bad news for somebody coming down the track, and you just wonder what kind of landscape will we be looking at in even a month or two with regards to contracting.
Yeah, I suppose with the proposed Pro 16 and the introduction of South African teams that has been discussed for quite some time now, also kind of running concurrently to this is the English Premiership and their bid to kind of ring fence that league, which kind of closes that door to the Welsh clubs, and it does put them in a kind of a strange position then, in that their I suppose faraway hills being greener option is gone from them, and they kind of have to come back to the Pro 14 or Pro 16 or whichever guys it takes up next year.
Yeah, it's that idea of an Anglo Welsh is generally only floated when the English clubs want something from either the Irish provinces or somebody else. If they're throwing around that idea, oh look, we're going to make an Anglo Welsh, it doesn't make any sense. I think the Welsh realised they made a big mistake at the start when they were offered a way into that league, chose to reject it for whatever reason. I think some of their fans, well, I don't think, I know some of their fans definitely regret that decision. But I think it's something that, you look at what a Pro 16 might be able to do. Like the big South African provinces or teams, whatever you call them, I think they would be a really strong addition to the Pro 16. And I think that, if you had a situation where there was less test match rugby, which I think is the biggest problem that everybody has with the Pro 14 as it stands. Like, I quite like those games. I like seeing young players get their opportunity. But for the likes of Glasgow, who are just, or Edinburgh, like I've got no love for Glasgow, but they've got so many guys at the international camp, they can barely put out a team out because, every team has got a few knocks. So they're throwing out very inexperienced setups, and they were beaten by Dragons at home there recently, or like at the weekend. So you look at the Welsh clubs are the same, where they've got, talented young guys, but they're getting blown away by, like, you look at the results Leinster have had recently against Edinburgh, for example. Edinburgh brought over a team. They had like 2 scrum halves on the bench. They had a few injuries, a lot of guys away internationally, and they show up at the RDS and they just get pumped. That doesn't really do, like, Irish, who doesn't love watching their team winning every week? But for the other guys, that starts to lose, like that is not fun very quickly. And those people start to lose a bit of interest, kind of go, look, the balance here isn't fair. We can't compete with these guys. So it just ends up being, we'll throw our hands up in the air at it. Like, so I think one way to rectify that would be, well, look, let's just have less test window games so you can play your stronger sides more often. There's a bigger games. The games have more recognizable players. It's a better TV product in theory. And that, I think, would be something that could help the perception of the league and, help cost, because it might make for smaller squads.
Yeah, just moving back to the aftermath of the Ireland-England game for 1 minute, the Ireland-Scotland game for 1 minute, and I suppose Johnny Sexton's post-match interview and some of the coverage in the aftermath of that. Look, like I said earlier, he did put a bit of perspective on it when he said that the only 2 sides we lost to this year were France and England, and I suppose, with a new coaching setup, with a lot of guys probably coming towards end of their career and some starting to blend into the squad, you could be, you could justifiably argue the case to give Andy Farrell a bit more time to kind of to find his way in this role. But, the criticism over and back are the back and forth between Sexton and the media. Personally, I don't see a problem with it. I mean, the media are entitled to have a shot at Sexton and to criticise him for his performances, and I don't see why media organisations or journalists should be, I'm not saying they should be fanboys, but I don't see why they should be immune from criticism going back the other direction, or not even direct criticism, but the player coming back with an alternative view or his opinion on their take.
Yeah, look.
It's healthy debate.
I don't see a problem with it. Look, I am a professional fanboy. I'll just come right out and say it. That's my gig, has been doing content that's related towards Munster. I criticise Munster when they don't perform well. I criticise Ireland when they don't perform well. When Johnny Sexton talks about like the media not liking certain bits and pieces that they're doing, I think that the media are correct in saying that Ireland haven't played all that well against Georgia or England. I think if you were coming out and saying, oh yeah, Ireland played brilliantly against Georgia, forget the haters, that'd be delusional. Ireland didn't play well. To criticise them there was legitimate. But you look at the way that the way Johnny Sexton would be thinking about this is that they know what they're doing in the camp. They know what they're trying to do. That might not always translate across in the game itself. But he wants to stick up for the squad. He wants to stick up for his teammates. So when he sees guys slating them in the press, he's the kind of combative personality where if he gets a chance to put a shot back on people who he feels are criticizing him unfairly, of course he's going to do that. But it's one of those things where you kind of just have to suck it up, really. If you can write a column saying that, Ireland are doing this, that, and the other wrong, and he's coming out and saying, well, I think you're talking shit, like, you kind of have to take that as just part of the gig, Because, like, do we want a media world where we keep hearing how nobody likes these pressers because everything is so anodyne and everything is so, like, so stale and so boring? If he wants to have a shot back in a post-match presser because he feels some fellas have wronged him, more power to him. At the same time, there's this weird idea that the rugby media doesn't criticise the Irish rugby team. And I think I'm not sure where it comes from, but I see it in my mentions every now and then on a big day after Ireland have lost. Oh, the media won't criticise the Irish rugby team because it's all some sort of cosy cartel. I can guarantee it absolutely is not a cosy cartel. There's lots of guys criticising who don't like the criticism that they get in certain papers or from certain columnists or whatever else, or on the TV. They don't like that. And you just look at what Jacob Stockdale said recently about reading some stuff both on social media and elsewhere about going, shit, I don't like this at all. It's a balancing job, I suppose. Everything that you criticise, you'd have to hope that you'd say it to the person if they brought it up to you. So going, hey, look, you were saying this. What are you talking about? You'd hope that you could at least go, well, this is what I think, X, Y, and Z. And they can say, well, you're talking shit or whatever. It's just one of those things, I think, that I think we'd be better off for it if there was a bit more back and forth like that. And, you know, I had a conversation with Sinead Kassan there on Twitter on Saturday, whenever the game was. And she said that she's asked kind of, you know, questions that players haven't liked. And we've seen that in pressers where she has. It's not unusual. And I think more of it is needed, because I think I like the idea of a relationship being more of a back and forth between the players and the media. Some guys will get on with, some guys who won't, just like life, really.
Yeah, and it can be, I suppose it can be combative, and you can have a bit of niggle in it, while at the same time being respectful. And you know, you don't have to agree with everything people say, but you know, so long as it's done in a manner where, you know, you give a shot, take a shot, then I don't see the issue with it.
Yeah, because like honestly, like a player might have a mic in front of his face for 2 minutes in a week. Meanwhile, there's columns, there's radio segments, there's online posting, there's all this stuff where they could be criticized left, right, and center all week long, and they only may get a mic in their face for 30 seconds where fellas are asking him, oh, how did you get on it? You know, how did you feel the game went? You know, whether they won or lost. Well, I'm happy we won, or I'm sad we lost. And they may feel, well, look, this is my shot now to go, you don't like what we're doing, but we think we're progressing quite well. You know, I can't blame a player for wanting to have a shot back if he feels that people have been unfair to him. I don't know why Johnny wastes his time with it, really. I think, you know, it just creates a kind of a needless, where he's creating enemies for himself. But he seems like the type of guy who likes that. He likes to have that needle with somebody. If it's not with a player, if it's not with a rival, it's with the media. So I think it's just kind of, I like it. You know, more power to him.
Tom, we do, of course, have Champions Cup coming up soon for Munster, but we'll look at that later on in the week. Tell us about what you're going to be doing ahead of that game, ahead of that team announcement between now and the weekend.
Well, I'll be looking at some of the young performers that have been in Munster during the week or during the season to date, seeing how they have scaled up from maybe the expectations at the start of the season. I'm also going to be building up with the Red Eye, the Blood and Thunder Matchday Preview podcast for that game against Harlequins coming up this weekend, and trying to predict seeing how it might go for Munster. So it's going to be very interesting. So that's on patreon.com/GeoRedKings for as little as €2 a month.